Good afternoon, everyone. This talk is about a collaborative project that's still ongoing between Codethink and Ferrous Systems. It was started by the RISC project. It's about getting 64-bit RISC-V Linux to Tier 1 in Rust. So we're going to start by talking about the project itself, why it's important, why it's exciting, why we're doing it. We'll go on to talk about what Tier 1 actually means in the context of Rust, the progress we've made so far on the project, the work that still needs to be done, what comes next, both in terms of the project and beyond, and how you can join in as well. Before we go any further introductions, so I'm Joshua Zivkovic. I'm a software engineer at Codethink. Today I'm joined by Lucas.
Yeah, I'm Lucas Wirth. I'm a software engineer at Ferrous Systems, and involved in the project as well is Anna Hopton from us, who is the lead engineer of the project.
Right, and now I'm going to hand over to Lucas for the next portion.
So, well, about the project, as the title states, we are attempting to bring the RISC-V Linux target to Tier 1 in the Rust project. What exactly that means, I'll explain in a bit. The project is funded by the RISC project, and, well, why are we actually trying to do this for Rust? Rust is a pretty new language still, and it is very desired by a lot of developers nowadays. And it is becoming more prevalent amongst embedded and also safety-conscious projects. Due to this, it also becomes more prevalent in dependencies of these projects, which may include your projects as well. You might already be using Rust directly or indirectly. So then, why exactly RISC-V Linux with Rust? Well, likewise, Linux is entering the space more and more as well, which prior to that was mainly the domain of QNX and similar operating systems. And in a similar fashion, RISC-V is also becoming more and more prevalent in this space. So supporting these targets just makes more sense in general, in our opinion. So what does it actually mean for a target to become Tier 1 in the Rust project? Basically, the target support of the Rust project is divided in 3 tiers, where Tier 3 is effectively, this target exists in the compiler, but it's not necessarily nicely supported. It may or may not work. It's not really known because it's not being tested. Whereas Tier 2, the next tier, is at least guaranteed to build. So the target usually, if you use the target, it will compile, but it may not work correctly. That is, the behavior is not necessarily tested. This is where the RISC-V target currently resides in. And then lastly, there's the Tier 1. This is the target we want to bring this is the tier we want to bring the target to. And this not only guarantees successful builds, but also that it works as one would expect. That is, the entire Rust test suite runs on this target, runs on this successfully, effectively. So if you use a Tier 1 target, you can expect it to just work. Right, I think it's lost.
So far, we've made really good progress on the project. The first thing we had to do was determine the current state of play. So does it actually compile for RISC-V? Are there any failing tests? Are there any tests that are ignored for RISC-V that we might need to enable before we can reach Tier 1? So as you've just heard, RISC-V is currently a Tier 2 target. So you can compile, and that does check out. You can compile. But the tests can fail, and we did have a handful of failing tests. So the first thing we had to do was fix those tests. Luckily, though, the majority of those tests were failing just because they'd fallen behind. Rust had updated over time, the outputs had changed, and the expected outputs for those tests hasn't been updated. So it was a matter of checking that the expected outputs now line up with the actual outputs and that those are correct. And we opened a pull request with those changes, and we've now got that merged. The other test that was failing, which is the only other one that we had a problem with, was because of an upstream LLVM bug, which meant certain compiler flags for Rust have been disabled for RISC-V because those features aren't working as they should. And this test relies on using those compiler flags to actually run the test. So without those flags, we just have to disable the test and carry on with that being a known bug for now. So with the fixes for the test merged, we could then start looking at CI. And CI, again, was a similar issue. Rust had evolved, CI had fallen behind. So it was a matter of Anna, who you heard of before, opened a pull request that copied similar changes made to other architectures' test suites. So updating the infrastructure, updating the name so it's actually in line with the modern naming scheme for the test suite. And we also got that merged as well. So we have working test and working CI. But the only problem we did have was, whilst testing CI, Anna also noticed that certain tests were failing only in CI, whereas they weren't failing locally. Luckily, though, another Ferrous engineer, Florian, had experienced a similar problem before, and it was to do with the Rust compiler making false assumptions about the toolchain being used in CI. So this was as simple as directly telling the Rust compiler what target it should be using, and that was as simple as a single pull request to make that change, and all the tests now work in CI. So the remaining progress now is we have all the pieces of the test and the CI. Now we need to put them together and run those tests in CI for every merge request. Once we've done that, we have an unknown bug that we still need to check out, which is to do with catch unwind. Florian, who I again mentioned earlier, has encountered a similar bug whilst doing ARM64 Tier-1 in Rust. So once we've investigated that, we can take the appropriate measures and deal with it if it actually needs dealing with. We then start getting onto the home run, so we can then establish a maintenance team. We can't reach Tier-1 without a maintenance team, because otherwise you'd reach Tier-1, and then if there's no one maintaining it, you're going to fall back behind, and then you're technically Tier-2 anyway. So once we have the maintenance team, we then get to the final step, which is opening an RFC, a request for change, to ask the Rust maintainers to take RISC-V from a Tier-2 target up to a Tier-1 target. And this isn't guaranteed to go through, because it's a big commitment maintaining a Tier-1 target. So the maintainers could say no, and all the work that we've done so far would be beneficial, but it wouldn't be officially used. And then coming off the back of that, if we are successful, we can then start looking at targeting other triples as well. So currently we're only targeting the one RISC-V 64-bit Linux triple, and there are many others that we could focus on and get far greater support for the dynamic RISC-V platforms that exist. So overall, going forward, we need to finish the CI setup. We need to get the test running in CI. We need to get maintainers and an RFC. And then beyond that, we can start looking at supporting more architectures for RISC-V, more extensions, more operating systems.
So you can help us test this. If you're already using Rust in some project, you can download the latest nightly toolchain, install the current unstable target, and build your project with this target. If everything works, that's great. If not, you can just submit an issue on the Rust-Lang issue tracker, and we will try and promptly fix it. Lastly, we have a poster session here as well, so please come by and say hello afterwards. Thank you.
We have time for one quick question, if there is any. Okay.
I have a quick question on the effort. How much effort has been put into this, and how much do you estimate actually finishing the work will be?
So far, it's been very little effort, really. It was all working pretty much as expected. It's just been a few small changes that we've had to make. Going forwards, though, and the remaining effort, as of yesterday, the maintainers want us to make some fairly large changes to the current RISC-V test suite. Those are looking to be fairly extensive, but we are only looking at a few more weeks until we can start looking at this actually being a Tier-1 candidate.
So thank you so much.